So in last week's video, we talked about rebrands, but we mainly focused on rebrands that weren't working for the artist for whatever reason. And in a lot of the comments, you guys suggested artists that actually had a successful rebrand and were pointing out some of the things that made that rebrand successful. And so instead of waiting months and months to follow up on a topic like I usually do, I was like, let me just go ahead. Let's talk about it now. Why not? So today I want to get into rebrands that were successful, that did work, whether that entails an artist changing their stage name, changing their sound, or maybe even doing something with an album that's not only integral to their brand, but changed the music industry in general. So let's go ahead and get into it. From the beginning of her career, Taylor Swift infused pop sounds and sensibilities, but her earliest albums are undoubtedly mainly country-leaning. I mean, her debut single was called Tim McGraw, so you can't really debate it. And in those early years, Taylor was a staple at the CMAs, obviously with her guitar, but also with her blend of dreamy, princessy styling with southern motifs like the cowboy boots and the large belts. Something people bring up frequently from Taylor Swift's country era is her fake accent from the time, and often they justify it because she did move from Pennsylvania to Nashville when she was about 14.
I was 11 and I had this demo CD of me singing karaoke music and was like, walked into every major record label and was like, hey, I'm Taylor, I'm 11, I want a record deal, call me, which, didn't really pan out, but I went back home and I think that's when I realized that I needed to be different. They see that sort of thing every single day.
Right.
So that's when I picked up a 12-string guitar and started playing and writing my own music.
But at that age, you're not going to have a completely different accent, and you wouldn't develop it and lose it all within a decade or less. And also, this had me curious as to why Taylor Swift got into country in the first place. I just assumed that she really liked it or something, and never thought deeper about it. And it seems like, yes, she was a big fan of LeAnn Rimes, Dolly Parton, Shania Twain, The Chicks. I'm not sure if Taylor herself has given an answer outside of liking country music as to why she got into it, but people in the Taylor Swift subreddit put forth some really good suggestions. Like, for example, if Taylor Swift started as a pop star right out of the gate, like in the mid to late 2000s, she would have been compared to artists like Kelly Clarkson and Christina Aguilera. And I'm not a big country person, and I wasn't when I was younger either, so I'm not sure if there were any super massive teens in country music at the time other than Taylor Swift, but maybe the fact that I can't think of any is the point, and Taylor Swift filled that gap. And someone else made the unfortunate but probably pretty true point that if Taylor had been purely a pop star, she and her image likely would have been more sexualized than what it was back then. And then back on the topic of Taylor just having been inspired by country music because she liked a lot of country artists growing up, a lot of people made the point that in the 90s and early 2000s, country and country pop were having a really big mainstream moment, so it would make a lot of sense to have influenced Taylor Swift's tastes. And I'm sure with it also being popular again right now, you could probably make that same argument with a lot of current artists or artists who are developing their tastes and sensibilities now and are going to release music in the future. Also, I think Taylor Swift's style of music very easily fits in with what country is about. It's very personal because she writes it, and it's often about heartbreak or some emotional conflict. And Taylor usually doesn't rely on overly complicated melodies or overproduced songs. And honestly, country as a genre doesn't really rely on a lot of bells, whistles, flashiness. It's meant to look simple, natural, authentic, even if there is a whole entire strategy and operation going on behind the scenes. And that's kind of the point of a Taylor Swift brand too, because her brand's definitely, I'm just like you. I'm just a girl with a pen and her guitar, pouring her heart out about her feelings and events you're probably also experiencing too, but you feel like no one cares about, or you feel they're too embarrassing to talk about even though it's pretty universal, which you may not know at the time. I did not know this about Taylor Swift, but her debut album, which is self-titled, it was the longest charting album of the 2000s at 157 weeks on the Billboard 200. 1989 is definitely the album where Taylor Swift was officially credited with going pop. A lot of the headlines at the time were Taylor Swift goes pop, she's going pop. But she'd been making that transition for years at that time, thinking of songs like I Knew You Were Trouble, which had come out back in 2012. And speaking of, I also saw people claim that Taylor losing Album of the Year for Red, that made her want to make something more solidly commercial for her next album. And it's just a theory, but if that was the plan, then it did indeed work. 1989 is fully, undoubtedly pop, and a lot of it is inspired by the euphoric beats and upbeat synths that made up a lot of pop in the decade that Taylor was born. And the album also came with a new haircut for Taylor. She traded in her long curly hair for a shorter, sleeker bob, and that's a pretty common hallmark of a rebrand. And several of the songs in 1989 were actually inspired by Taylor's move to New York City, like Welcome to New York. And if you're in a new environment, your sound and subject matter might change as you start to experience new things. And while standing on top of the Empire State Building, so it doesn't get any more city girl New York than that, Taylor called 1989 my very first documented official pop album. And Taylor executive produced the album with Max Martin, which is basically Say No More in terms of genre. Clearly it's gonna be pop. And she'd also worked with him on most of Red's big singles like 22, I Knew You Were Trouble, and We Are Never Getting Back Together. So again, really proves that Red, it was the setup for Taylor to go full pop with 1989. And also at the time, Taylor teamed up with Jack Antonoff for the first time for a couple of songs on this album, and he's obviously become a frequent collaborator and someone that a lot of the pop girls have come to enjoy working with. And then at the time, Taylor had her Girls Squad, which obviously was in the Bad Blood video, but she would go on to do events with them, bring them out on tour, red carpets. They were all over her Instagram whenever someone had a birthday party or an event like that. And at the time, I did not know that Taylor Swift and Katy Perry had beef, so it was also interesting for Taylor to have been like the new pop girl on the scene, though she wasn't obviously new to music or anything, beefing with like the pop girl at the time, because this is like post-Teenage Dream, post-Roar, pre-Witness Katy Perry. And obviously the pop rebrand worked because Taylor Swift is one of the biggest pop stars in the world even 10 years after this transition. And so much so that even after experimenting again with albums like Folklore and Evermore, pop is the quote-unquote home base that Taylor's returned to with her next two albums. And obviously The Life of a Showgirl is going to go in that direction too, since she is working with Max Martin. Emblematic of her sleazy yet glam irreverent music, pop star Kesha initially stylized her name by spelling it with a $ instead of an S. It made perfect sense for her persona, someone a little edgy, dare I say tacky, but purposely and comfortably so. And this would be how she spelled her name for her first 3 albums, Animal, Cannibal, and Warrior, released from 2010 to 2012. By 2014, though, Kesha had removed the $ from her name and debuted a still colorful but brighter, less glittery look, I think first at the VMAs. And just months later, in October of 2014, Kesha filed a lawsuit against producer and former collaborator Dr. Luke for sexual assault and battery, also claiming sexual harassment and gender violence. And though it had been speculated for a while, some fans of Kesha had claimed that she'd sent them letters from rehab that did confirm the abuse, and there are pictures of some of these online. And then later in 2017, she explained, "It happened after I went to rehab for my eating disorder. I let go of my facade about being a girl who didn't care. My facade was to be strong, and I realized it was total bullshit. I took out the $ because I realized that was part of the facade. It was a journey, and I'm happy. That was me in that part of my life. But then I turned a corner, but I still have a fucking tattoo of it on my hand. I'll have to figure that out." And her first album without the $, 2017's Rainbow, contains several songs about self-empowerment and self-discovery. Obviously, the big song from that album is Praying because it is an amazing song, but I think something like Woman definitely would also fit. And Kesha would return to a more carefree party-based sound on her next album, which was High Road. There's a track on that album called Kinky, which most of you guys know that I love, but she features Kesha with the $, aka her old self, on that song. And on her current tour called the Tits Out Tour, she opens the show playing TikTok with a severed head of her $ version of Kesha, kind of signifying that that part of her no longer exists. In addition, she rearranged several of the songs from those earlier albums. Blow has a rock version now that she performs live. My mind was blown. No pun intended. I ascended in the best way possible. Very fun. Before she was known as Latto, rapper Alyssa Stevens was known as Miss Mulatto and was a contestant on the reality TV show The Rap Game. The premise was that one kid rapper would become the next big thing. I think they got signed to Jermaine Dupri's label or something, maybe won some money. You know, the regular reality TV deal. On the show, Miss Mulatto's stage name was explained as a reclamation of the word, which is often used derogatorily towards mixed-race people. So of course it was explained to her on the show, as well as her father, because they had to have a parent there because they're kids. And people are going to definitely see the word as a slur at worst, disrespectful and silly at best, because no one really sees it as a kind word since it is rooted in slavery and it's no longer regularly used. And maybe Latto liked the stage name at the time, but it's like she was 16, 17, maybe even slightly younger than that. So at that age, a lot of your opinions, they're yours, but then a lot of others are your parents, so who knows?
My mom was pregnant with me when she was 15 years old. She went to a majority white school, so of course, you know, her being 15 years old, pregnant by a black man, that was just too much for them to handle. Remember getting bullied over what I had no control. I took that and took off. Now I'm proud to be mulatto, so I don't know.
Some strong words.
And so Latto, FKA Miss Mulatto, she actually did win the show and in time obviously became a known enough rapper in her own right to not just be known as the winner of season 1 of The Rap Game. And for a while, she did keep the Miss Mulatto stage name to much controversy. That was also her Instagram handle, so I would assume her other social media accounts were under the same name or something very similar. And though you always have your Is Not That Deep crowd pertaining to any topic, this was never really not a problem. It's not something people just decided to get mad about after she blew up. No, people were always questioning this. And then I think even at one point she dropped the Miss and was just known as Mulatto as she got a little bit older. And then also in the midst of this controversy, a video came out of her calling one of her darker skinned friends, who I believe was also a stylist or assistant of some sort, her pet orangutan. And you could definitely argue that it was an accidentally poor choice of words. Latto didn't mean it like that, but it can be really hard to give someone the benefit of the doubt when they've also got a black parent and then your stage name is also something a lot of people consider to be a slur, but one that also does set you apart racially from the person you are calling an orangutan or a monkey. And this happened in September of 2020. In this headline, it's an insane read regardless, but it makes even less sense if you are unaware that Mulatto is a stage name. In this very article, which is from Hot New Hip Hop, it also brings up the fact that she was getting criticism for her stage name all the way back in 2016 when she was also in the rap game. And by December of 2020, so a couple months after this pet orangutan controversy, it seems like Latto was making it known at that point that her stage name was going to change, but not immediately. And she said at the time, "People got to understand too that at this level in an artist's career, that's not just something that happens overnight, or it's not something that even happens period, because it's so much money and investments on the line when you do shit like that. So I think people need to be more patient, but it's definitely in the works." And by May of 2020, Latto made the name change official. The new stage name, Big Latto or Latto, though obviously spelled and pronounced the same, was meant to be thought of as a shortened form of lottery. And to solidify that, there was a lot of lottery imagery with the money, the poker chips, slot machines, things like that. Her handle was Latto777 at one point, I believe. And then after the name change was official, she said in an interview, "You know, you might know your intentions, but these are strangers who don't know you, never even met you in person. So you got to hear each other out. And if you know those aren't your intentions and that's how it's being perceived, it's like, why not make a change or alter it?" For me, it was the name. So now I'm like, okay, my intentions was never to glorify being mulatto. And then in a tweet from a few months later, she revealed that she'd had the stage name since like elementary school, which is wild to me because she tweeted, "I've apologized for it multiple times, even though I didn't name myself at 8 years old. I took the blame and accountability, turned over a new leaf, and made something positive of it, all while maintaining my trademarks, LLCs, etc., without branching too far off of my established brand." And then to really sell it, Latto did call her sophomore album, which came out in 2022, 777, again, that gambling slot machine reference. The lead single, Big Energy, also made use of similar imagery in the music video, and then the song uses the same Tom Tom Club sample as Mariah Carey's Fantasy, and Mariah did end up appearing on a remix. So yes, the name change for Latto was a very necessary rebrand, honestly one that was pretty predictable, or predictably necessary, I should say. Before she was calling her exes gay derogatory and kissing girls, Katy Perry released an album under her real name, Catherine or Katie Hudson. The album, which was self-titled, was released in March of 2001 when she was only 16. It has a more alternative rock sound, obviously with the Christian influences though, and at the time, Katy said that her work was inspired by artists like Fiona Apple. How could I hear you when I was so deaf? And after her debut album, Katy wouldn't release another one until 2008's One of the Boys, which was characterized by a poppier sound and retro pinup styling mixed with the silliness and neon craze of the era. And Katy started off in Christian music likely because she grew up in a very Christian home, as her parents were Pentecostal pastors and evangelists. So that informing her musical roots makes a lot of sense. And she was initially signed to a Christian label, but after the label shut down and she got a little older and away from strictly her parents' influence, Katy wanted to explore genres other than gospel. And Katy later said in 2013, "I was raised in a super sheltered atmosphere where we didn't watch anything besides Trinity Broadcasting Network, which was called TBN or the Fox News Channel. I was never allowed to call deviled eggs. I had to call them angel eggs. I think that parents grow up with an idea of what they want their kids to be like, and then their kids grow up to be people of themselves, of their own." As for why she changed her stage name from Katie Hudson to Katy Perry, it sounds more upbeat and marketable, and Perry is her mom's maiden name. And not only that, it was also done to avoid confusion with the actress Kate Hudson. And clearly, the full rebrand, the look, the genre, the name change, it all worked to the point where, like I was saying in the Taylor section, Katy Perry ruled pop for years, especially in the early 2010s, to the point where she was breaking records previously held by Michael Jackson. And just a year after releasing Art Pop, Lady Gaga made this somewhat unexpected pivot from pop to jazz, releasing Cheek to Cheek in 2014 with Tony Bennett. Art Pop was successful, but it was also an album where some felt that Gaga's vision of simultaneously blending, critiquing, and reinventing the demarcation between pop and high art, it definitely got lost in translation, lost in the lyricism, lost in the marketing too, I would say. And for a while on Stan Twitter, the album even had the nickname of Art Flop. And though Art Pop debuted atop the Billboard 200, its first week sales paled in comparison to that of Gaga's previous album, Born This Way. And to be fair, those sales were likely pretty inflated because the album was sold for 99 cents on Amazon for a little while. Eventually, reports came out that Art Pop's performance was a financial failure for Gaga's label Interscope. And according to the Examiner, Art Pop lost Interscope over $25 million that they spent to promote that album. They reported the losses were so severe that it put 50 Interscope employees in jeopardy of being laid off. And Gaga refuted these claims in a post on her fan site, and it seems like the Examiner article has since been taken down, so I don't know if those jobs were ever truly lost. At the time, again, this is around 2013, 2014, it also felt that Lady Gaga had been a little overexposed, so to speak. Maybe a little overexposed is an understatement, considering she'd been a pop staple since she released The Fame in 2008 and had maintained that momentum. I also think at this time in her career, a lot of people still weren't taking her seriously and were just seeing her as a gimmick queen because of the weird outfits and performances, despite delivering stunning vocals, choreography, and playing instruments during her shows. Before releasing Cheek to Cheek, Gaga had actually performed with Tony Bennett before, and said the album actually wasn't as left field as it may have seemed to some of her fans since she'd been a lifelong jazz fan. And in an interview, Tony already said that Gaga had the markings of a good jazz singer, telling NPR. She'll turn her phrase, she'll make it different because of the moment that she's singing. And so what happens is it keeps the songs alive. The interpretations become very intimate and everlasting. And in that same interview, Gaga said of Tony, he's brought out a subtlety in me that I've missed for a while because my life is very noisy. It's a lot harder to sing with autotune in a way, you know? It's a lot harder to sing with rigid electronic music and lots of spectacle. It can be very difficult because it's not always extremely natural. Aside from showcasing another side of herself to fans who may not have seen it, with Cheek to Cheek, Gaga and Tony were also excited to introduce several jazz standards to a new generation, or just introduce a new version of a beloved jazz song to those who were already familiar. Because it helped to show off her more diverse skill set, I do think that Cheek to Cheek was a perfect stepping stone to elevate Gaga's career. Not to say that pop isn't career-worthy on its own, because Gaga herself wouldn't even agree with that. It's just often the case that if pop is all that you do, you're not taken as seriously no matter how strong of a writer, singer, or entertainer you are. Along with the genre transition, Gaga pared down her look a little. Definitely still platinum blonde, still eye-catching, but she incorporated a lot more gowns and classic looks. And her album after Cheek to Cheek, which was 2016's Joanne, that one is a more introspective look at Gaga than some of her earlier work, as the album is inspired by her deceased aunt. And also compared to her first few albums, a lot of the songs are slower in tempo. They're not jazz songs either. Mostly they're in that softer rock Americana realm, really playing up the nostalgia and hominess and often longing to return to it. And that album is kind of skipped over too in Gaga's discography, but again, I think this continued transition helped the wider industry take her more seriously, and it probably did help to open some Hollywood doors. Because in the mid-2010s, we started to see Lady Gaga getting more prestigious opportunities unrelated to her own pop music, like getting to perform the Sound of Music medley at the Oscars, which outlets like Time considered career redefining for her. A couple years later, Gaga would even get to play the lead role in A Star Is Born, which not only allowed her to showcase her acting talents, but also lend her voice to the soundtrack, so again, another musical project outside of Lady Gaga, the pop star. In previous adaptations of A Star Is Born, interpretations of the female lead, which is named Ally in Lady Gaga's version, she'd been played by other great Hollywood entertainers like Judy Garland and Barbra Streisand. And then, of course, like most of us know, Gaga returned to pop in 2020 with Chromatica. And then, honestly, right now with Mayhem, I think we are in the middle of a legendary Naja reheat. I have been enjoying the year of Mayhem. But switching genres for a couple years just to remind people that you can do it, that you don't only do pop, even if you love to do pop, definitely opened wider doors. Put Gaga in that multi-hyphenate entertainer status. So still related to artist rebrands, but I was also thinking of rebrands in terms of the album cycle not only being pivotal for the artists in their own personal brand, but it also having a larger impact in the overall music industry and maybe what other artists would incorporate into their brands. Relatively recently, in terms of hip-hop, something like Kanye's 808s and Heartbreak, which came out in 2008, that album was responsible for ushering trends in hip-hop, like increased vocalization or singing, using more autotune, and obviously addressing more vulnerable topics like heartbreak. And so I think at this time and for years after, we get a lot of hip hop songs from the late 2000s, early 2010s that rather than being upbeat, they're more mellow, lots of vocalizing. And I would say that a lot of them kind of have a fusion of hip hop and R&B more so. I think a pretty clearly influenced project would be something like Marvin's Room. And then another album of this type, I would say, is Beyonce's self-titled. Obviously, with songs like Crazy in Love, Irreplaceable, Single Ladies, she's been a solo force for years. But like what I was saying happened with Lady Gaga, I feel like self-titled definitely put Beyonce into another echelon of stardom. Additionally, I think around then, we get the idea of what a Beyonce song, as we now know, sounds like, with the atmospheric layering, the genre fusion, those chopped samples, those stacked ad-libs. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the album's impacts outside of Beyonce's own brand. Self-titled also changed the regular album release dates from Tuesdays to Fridays, and then the surprise drop popularized the concept of releasing an album without any prior singles, something made possible by the streaming era because, people can just sample your album for basically free once it's released, rather than having to decide to purchase it after hearing maybe a song or two. And then additionally, it popularized visual albums, be it a feature-length film or something more like an anthology where each video just goes with its own correlated song. And even for her next few albums after self-titled, Beyonce did visual albums or films to accompany. So maybe we could say the lack of Renaissance visuals, that was a rebrand in a sense. And just thinking of this rebrand topic more generally, it's pretty common for artists to transition genres, update their style or sound, because rarely ever is a project, an album, gonna be a carbon copy of the one before it. Like for example, with Beyonce, post self-titled, if we take that as a rebrand or turning point, I don't think that every subsequent Beyonce album has been a complete rebrand, even if they do involve her switching genre or concepts. I feel similarly about The Weeknd. And his sort of rise to the mainstream, because originally I was going to consider Beauty Behind the Madness maybe as a rebrand, or maybe even around Starboy, considering that's when he changed up his pretty iconic hairstyle. But despite the pop sensibilities, I would say musically, neither Beauty Behind the Madness nor Starboy, neither of them are these large deviations from the subject matter of The Weeknd's previous music. Thinking of songs like The Hills, obviously, often acquainted from Beauty Behind the Madness, or even songs like the title track Party Monster or 6 Feet Under from Starboy. So I'll be interested to know what you guys think about this one. It seemed like a transition into becoming a more mainstream artist rather than a full-on rebrand. And I did look at articles from this time around 2014 to 2016 just to see how they were writing about The Weeknd's career transition, if you will, and none of them were really referring to this period as a rebrand either. Just an increase in momentum, if anything. And likewise, I was also debating this for both Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter, because I wouldn't say that they're examples of complete sonic rebrands either, just more so growing into your sound. But then in terms of their actual looks, even more than The Weeknd, I would say, it's pretty clear that once they found a more distinct style, the fiery red hair and drag for Chappell, and then the mid-century dreamy coquette vibes with the blonde curls and bangs for Sabrina, that's when things really took off for them. I think Chappell's only officially released 2-3 songs since her rise to the mainstream last year, so I think it might be too early to tell how her sound is changing and evolving based off of a handful of singles. And then now that I've gotten more into Emails I Can't Send, which obviously came out a few years ago, I do agree with a lot of the Sabrina fans who were saying short and sweet and I'm man's best friend. They're not as much of a deviation from the Sabrina of a few years ago as it sounds like if you actually listen to that album, now that I've listened to the album in full. Then lastly, another sort of rebrand, one that I've actually made a whole video on already, a sort of rebrand that I do think is pretty easy to categorize, is the whole concept of the good girl gone bad era, or just more generally the good pop star gone bad. Typically, these are entertainers who are pretty famous as children, so they're going sort of hard in the other direction to shed that image. And usually this will involve a more mature or revealing look, more explicit lyrics, and maybe even some publicly more quote-unquote bad or rebellious behavior, like partying, drugs, and irreverent tweets. So I'll definitely have that video linked. But some examples that were brought up. Of course, Miley and Bangers, Ariana Grande, Dangerous Woman, Rihanna with Good Girl Gone Bad because how could we not? And then even Lil Nas X's transition from Old Town Road to Call Me By Your Name, and then the rest of Montero. And then finally, because even after doing this video and apparently having done several videos before that touch on this topic, I'm still not entirely sure what to me constitutes a rebrand. I think my answer is that there is no completely distinct answer. Like, would you say Dua Lipa, for example, has rebranded for all 3 albums just because she's changing her font, her hair, and doing a very slight genre change? Even though I feel like those are 3 distinct albums, I don't know if we got rebrand. So I'm eager to hear what you guys think. I'm eager to hear what makes a rebrand to you. What are some examples of actually successful rebrands, whether I mentioned them in the video whether I didn't, because I'm sure this is a topic that I will touch on again, that I wouldn't mind touching on again, because it is interesting to watch artists grow, change, see what resonates, and see what doesn't. As always, thank you so very much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that you can stick around for more. Also, if you'd like to become a channel member and get early access to videos, the link is in the description. And again, thank you so very much for watching. I love you all so very much, and we'll see you so very soon. Bye-bye.